right? This lesson will help you to find out with different ways that we are going to use to compare and contrast numbers in the writing tax 1. So my goal is that I'm going to show you that there are a lot of ways you can use to compare numbers, okay? And then we will look at why it's important to compare. I'll also teach you the 8 methods that they are not exhaustible, okay? So this is not the exhaustible comparison method, but I'm going to teach you 8 ways that you can use to compare. We'll go through with some examples, and then I'll give you an exercise for you to do after this lesson. So why should you spend time learning how to use different languages? The short answer that I will give to you is that it's very important. It's part of your task. Okay. The instruction on your essay tells you to make comparison where relevant. So it's very important that you spend more time to know how to differentiate, spend time to know the vocabulary that you need for the comparison, so that you can use it easily when it's time for you to write. Just after this one, I'm going to teach you some of the different ways that you can do this, and I'm going to use 8 different ways that you can do this, and then you think that it's too much, but it actually depends on the score that you are aiming. If you are looking for a higher score, then you should know how to vary your language, because that's what the examiner will be looking at. You will need to have varied languages and varied grammar too as well, and a correct one if you are looking for a better bound score. So the tax 1 is simply easier to write if you are able to use different kind of languages and different kind of structures, which is important when you're having more of vocabularies, especially when it comes to the comparison. Okay, if you can say the same thing in different ways, then it makes your writing easier. So now let's look at the different ways that we can compare these numbers. Right, to make this lesson shorter, I have made a checklist of the 8 ways that we are going to use to compare the numbers, and this is not the exhaustible method. There are different ways that you can use. Okay, so let's go through. So the first one will be how to compare between two different sentences, the words to use or the vocabulary to use to compare two sentences, and also how to compare within two sentences. All right, and we can use words like few, fewer, less than, comparison, qualifying your comparison. So this time you're not just using few or fewer, but we are quantifying it. Okay, so we are using something to quantify it. And also the next one will be using most or least, and then we have using similar, same, or as, dash as, something in between to show similarity. And also we can have words to show differences, and also we can use other numbers too as well. So this will be the 8 methods that I'm going to teach you. As I said, these are the ways you're going to do it, and you have several ways to do them. So let's go to the first one, how to compare between two sentences. So comparing between two sentences is clearly you trying to start a new sentence with a word phrase that shows that you're about to make a comparison with the previous sentence. Okay, so you have two sentences, and then when starting the new sentence, you start it with a word phrase that shows that you are comparing it or contrasting it with the previous sentence. So let's look at an example. There are several basic words that you can use, and the first one you're going to use will be in contrast. Okay, in contrast. So let's look at an example. The most popular form of holiday among the Welsh was self-catering, with over 60% choosing to cook for themselves. In contrast, okay, only 5% of the English chose this form of vacation, and hostel accommodation was more popular at 48%. So in contrast, here is now being used to compare this sentence with the previous one. Okay, so this is one way you can do it. You can use the word in contrast. The next word, you can also use the word in comparison. Okay, in comparison. So let's read. Almost 50% of the English, Scots, and Northern Irish chose to stay in a hotel for their holiday. This is a first sentence. So we are comparing the next sentence. In comparison, all right, staying in self-catering accommodation was much less popular, with around 10% of people choosing this. So we are comparing the second sentence to the next sentence, the previous one. Let's look at the next word, other basic word you can use for comparison. However. All right, let's read. The general pattern was for hotel accommodation to be the most popular, with around half of the people choosing it. The majority of the Welsh, however, chose to stay in self-catering accommodation. So however is also used to compare. So we checked in contrast, in comparison, and this time we are using however. Let's look at the next word. The last word that we are going to use will be on the other hand. All right, on the other hand. So let's see. A majority of the British chose to stay in a hotel for their holiday. On the other hand, so this time we are contrasting. So it's a comparison and contrasting. On the other hand, there was an exception to this because over 50% of the Welsh opted for self-catering accommodation. So you can see that throughout the sentences we are comparing the British and the Welsh, and then hotel for their holiday, and those who choose self-catering accommodation for their holiday. So we're just comparing those two using the word on the other hand, however, and in contrast and in comparison. There are several words you can use for this. So this is the some of the words that we use to compare between two sentences. Okay, now let's move on to the next method. We are now going to compare within two sentences. Remember, the first one we compare between two sentences, but this time we're going to compare within a single sentence. Okay, so we have several basic words we use, but I'm going to use some of them here, and I want you to also research more. So the first basic word I'm going to use is the word while. All right, so let's look at an example. While there are 2 million miles of train lines in the UK, there are only 3 million in France. So you're comparing the number of train lines between France and the UK. Okay, we use the word while. So you can say, while there are 4 million miles of train lines in the UK, there are only 3 million in France. Okay, the next word is whereas. So whereas most of the French prefer to travel to work by train, only a small minority of British do. So a small minority of British like to travel by train, but most of the French actually prefer to go to work by train. So they use the word whereas. Whereas most of the French prefer to travel to work by train, only a small minority of the British do. Let's look at the next word. Although. Okay, although 15% of the French read novels, only 5% of British do. Although 15% of French read novels, only 5% of the British do. The last word will be but. Almost 25% of French females study maths with a private tutor, but nearly 60% of English with one. Okay, so remember we are using these words to compare within sentences, and these are some of the words. These are not exhaustible ones, okay? There are several of them that you can use to compare within sentences. All right, so this will be how to compare within sentences. I would like you to go and find out more. Let's look at the next method. We are now going to use fewer or less than. So this time you're going to use the comparison, the degree, okay? So the superlative, right, and comparative, okay? So using fewer and less than, this is the way you can also use it. First of all, let's read this one. Fewer mobile phones were bought in 2013 than in 2014. So comparing 2014 and 2013, you can see that there were less mobile phone bought in 2013 than in 2014. So this time it is between two things. So you understand. So this is comparative. All right, so let's go. The second one, less oil was consumed in 2013 than in 2014. So between two places or between two things. So we use the comparative words fewer or less than. All right, let's go to the next method. Sometimes you can go more specific. All right, so you can see that in the previous one, just the recent past, we stated that you can use the word fewer or less than, but sometimes you can specify how less, okay, how less is it, by using numbers, and this is what we're going to use. So we are using you now have to bring in digits or numbers to show how less, okay? So let's look at these two examples. The first one is far less people chose to travel by train than by car. You can see this one, there is no specific number of people who chose to travel by train and by car, but we can make it more specific by bringing the percentage here. So 25% fewer people chose to travel by train than by car. Okay, so this time you show that you have seen that we brought in the detail and not just the comparison. We just brought in the specific detail. All right, let's go to the next method. So in this method too, we'll be using the superlatives. The previous one we used the comparatives where we're comparing between two things, but this time we're using the superlatives. You're going to the highest or the lowest point. So we use the word most, least, or fewest. Okay, so let's look at examples. The most popular form of entertainment in the UK was going to the cinema. So as compared to the lot of entertainment in the UK, the most popular form is going to the cinema. Okay, the least common form of transport was taking a taxi. So people chose to have a lot of forms of transportation, but the least common in the UK or wherever they mentioned was to pick up a taxi. So least, most, fewest, okay, these are words that we can use to also show comparison. And this one is for superlatives. So the previous one was comparatives where we're comparing between just two things, but this one we go to the highest or the least among it. All right, let's move to the next method. Some of the numbers that you'll be comparing will be similar. So these are some of the basic structures or words that you will need. The first one is similar to. All right, this is not the exhaustible. There are some of them, a lot of them. Okay, so let's go on. Similar to. The percentage of females and males who studied languages at university were very similar. Right, I can say almost the same. Okay, a similar amount of gas and electricity was used domestically in the homes or in homes. The figures for 2012 were very similar to the figures of 2013. So these are some of the words you can use to also compare similar situations. You can also use the word same as. Okay, so let's look at the example. The percentage of females who studied at the university in 2011 was almost the same as in 2012. So those who studied in the university in 2011 was almost the same as in 2012. Okay, so these are also some of the ways you can use to compare similar numbers. Now let's look at other methods. So if you have some things to be similar, it can also be different. Okay, you can have several ones to which are very different. So let's look at some variations that we can also use when we have differences. The amount of time spent at home differed by almost 25% according to gender. It differed, so the differences between them. All right. Second example, there was a difference of over 25% in the amount of time males and females spent at home. Difference. The third example, this figure was very different among males. Only half of whom watched television. So if you check the differences, only half of the females, so the males actually watch television. So that is for comparing differences. There are several ways which I would like you to also go and research. Let's go to the next method, which will be our last one. The next way that you can make comparison is to do some simple arithmetics. Okay, so sometimes you can just try to find some subtractions or additions. You can make some things, check some of them, just simple arithmetics, and then you are good to go. All right, so let's look at these few examples. 5 million fewer units of gas were sold in 2014. So maybe there were about 9 million in 2015, and then we have just 4 million in 2014. So if you check the differences, you have 5 million fewer units of gas which was sold in 2014 as compared to 2015. So just checking the differences and then you'll be able to go. That is for arithmetics. Twice as many people elected to use gas, not electricity, for cooking. So if you check the number of people who voted that they use gas and not electricity for cooking, it's just twice as many. Okay, so twice as many people elected to use gas. So if there were 20 people who chose that they said they use electricity for cooking, we have 40 people who said they use gas. So twice as many people voted to use gas as compared to electricity for cooking. So just arithmetic, looking at the differences, and you're good to go. The third example, half the number of people chose to use gas as electricity. Half the number of people chose to use gas as electricity. So maybe 40 people used electricity for cooking and not gas. Okay, so 40 people were using electricity and 20 people were using gas. Okay, so if you check those who are using gas as compared to those who are using electricity for cooking, we can say that the number who are using gas for cooking were half the number who were using electricity. Okay, so that is what we can say about that. It's about using arithmetics and you are good to go. All right, so it's about using arithmetics and you are good to go. Okay, so with these 8 different methods of comparison, I believe you'll be in a good position to vary your words in terms of comparing numbers and percentages. I would meet you in our next lesson, but before that, you have an exercise to also work your hand on when it comes to comparing numbers, and then we'll meet in our next lesson.